Welcome to the Canyon City Planning Commission regular meeting Wednesday, June 27th, 2018. I now call this meeting to order. Would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Denise, please call roll.
Okay, good evening. Chairman Maloney,
Here.
Commissioner Sherrato,
Here.
Commissioner Brandon Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Randy Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Harmon,
Here.
Commissioner Ledoux,
Here.
and Council Liaison Hamrick.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Denise. At this time, we have 3 sets of minutes to approve, so I now ask for approval of minutes from May 23rd, 2018 Joint Planning City Council, May 23rd, 2018 regular meeting, and June 13th special meeting for the new Planning Commissioner training. Does anyone have any corrections to those minutes? No? Okay, hearing none, I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve all 3 sets of minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay. Denise, please call roll.
Okay. Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Harmon,
Aye.
Chairman Maloney,
Aye.
Commissioner Sherrato,
Aye.
Commissioner Brandon Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Randy Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux.
Aye.
Thank you. Item number 3, public hearing, proposed minor subdivision, Grading Homes minor subdivision. Applicants are here, Bernie Brady Builders. Location 525 Grading Avenue. I now open this public hearing. The provisions of the city municipal code, and in particular Title 17 thereof, the subdivision regulations, and the comprehensive plan of the city of Canyon City are incorporated into the record of the hearing as if set forth verbatim. Can we please have a staff report?
Well, I'll fill in.
Okay.
What happened to our city planner? So this is a public hearing for Grading minor subdivision at, again, 525 Grading Avenue. It is approximately 118 feet north of the northwest corner of Grading Avenue and Cherry Street. As the chairman has mentioned, the applicants are here, and they seek to subdivide an existing 2-acre parcel into 5 single-family residential lots. The applicable notices were completed, and we really need the city planner to walk through this.
Do we want to take 5 minutes and wait?
Yeah, if we could, we'll see. I'm guessing if maybe Adam went to see what happened to him. I don't know if he was making some additional copies for somebody. I did see him at the copy machine upstairs.
Okay. Well, if it's okay with everyone, we'll just take a 5-minute break and talk amongst yourselves.
So are your copies we just noted? Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. This evening we are here to consider the request for a minor subdivision for the Grading Homes minor subdivision. The subject property is located north of Cherry Street between Grading Avenue and Del Rey Avenue. It is currently a 2-acre parcel. It is zoned R2 medium-density residential and is surrounded by existing single-family residential lots. It appears to be a remnant parcel left over as the lots to the north and south of this block were carved off for single-family residential use. It has not previously been the subject of a development proposal. The parcel has a relatively level grade and has a designation with the Fremont County Assessor's Office as pasture land. It does contain frontage on both Gradine and Delray. And finally, it should be noted that the R2 zoning is not unique to the subject parcel. All the lots in the block, as well as the full blocks to the east, west, south, and north, have the same R2 classification with lot sizes which tend, in most cases, to exceed the minimum lot area under the R2 zone. That would be 6,000 square feet. The applicant is proposing to subdivide this parcel into 5 lots. Lot 1, the largest of the 5 lots, will contain 21,845 square feet and will access Delray Avenue. Lots 2 through 5, each the same size at 16,343 square feet, will all access Gradine Avenue. The lots taking access from Gradine Avenue may have to address ditch crossing issues for driveways, and issue to be addressed during the building permit process. In order to qualify as a minor subdivision under the City of Canyon City's regulations, the proposed subdivision must meet the following criteria. The subject parcel must be less than 10 acres in overall size. The resulting subdivision will create 5 or fewer lots. All resulting lots will meet both minimum lot area and minimum lot width and street frontage. In this case, under the R2 zone, the minimum lot area is 6,000 square feet and the minimum width at street edge is 60 feet. All of the lots must access a public right-of-way, and that public right-of-way cannot be one created with this subdivision. In other words, the street they access must be existing. And finally, all lots must be served with utilities, including water, sanitary sewer, electricity, and natural gas. Staff also finds that the proposed subdivision and single-family use will be consistent with the historic pattern of development in this neighborhood. The existing lots surrounding this parcel are all minimum lot size above the minimum lot size for the R2 zone, and these neighborhoods have all been in place for decades. The Gradine Homes subdivision will finish this block in a manner that respects the historic pattern of development. As of today, staff has received no phone calls or emails regarding this request, and there have been no inquiries about what it entails, and no opinions offered positively or negatively about the subdivision request. So with that, staff is prepared to make the following recommendations. First, staff recommends that the Planning Commission, following a public hearing on this request, cite the findings of fact concerning the proper notice and foundation for this request so as to confirm the city's jurisdiction to make a determination for the subdivision request. And second, staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend that City Council approve the Gradine Homes minor subdivision request subject to the 2 conditions contained in staff's report. I should warn you that one of those conditions the applicant is going to want to speak to that has to do with the fire district requirements. They will present their case, and I think at the conclusion of that, Adam and I might be able to provide a greater context for that and let you know what sort of options you have on that issue. So with that, we conclude staff's presentation. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions the Planning Commission may have. Also present to speak on this project is one of the associates, Mr. John Carochi.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there any questions from the commission for staff? No? Okay. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
So this is I have a few questions. This is a minor subdivision, is that correct, Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The review criteria you used were the existing criteria in our regulations, is that correct?
They are. Later on this evening's agenda, there is a matter concerning those criteria. We have been operating for about a year now under a pending ordinance doctrine, so the criteria that we used are the ones that you're going to be discussing later on your agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. That's I think will be helpful for the other Planning Commission members. I was on the Planning Commission during those exaction discussions. I was not a member of the City Council at that point, but I did sit in on all the meetings. And so Adam was there, I was there, and then basically all the rest of you guys are newcomers. But given that it's the pending ordinance exemption or exception that you are proceeding under, are there differences in approvals that the city would have given using the ordinances as written?
I believe that there are. Adam, could you elaborate?
Sure. So there's numerous things that we would have discussed that didn't come up today, and those namely had to do with street improvements, future improvements agreement likely for curb gutter and sidewalk. There may have been a water main upgrade. There would have been discussion probably about streetlights. There might have been a lower level drainage analysis that would have been required. Those are essentially, there would have been a stormwater impact fee collected at this time, which has been changed by city council altogether by ordinance. So those are mainly the things that would have changed for this type of application.
Yes, and pretty much all the things that you mentioned would be considered exactions.
Correct.
Yes. And jumping ahead, but I want to use this current application that the commission has before it as kind of a discussion issue. But one of the staff concerns about the public hearing that we're going to hold is that there may not be, only through the issuance of a building permit and enforcement of a building permit may a property owner become aware of additional parking, relocation of trash receptacles, interior pedestrian and vehicular circulation issues, and potentially additional screening requirements. Those are not exactions. Those are just review points in our code.
Right, and those would have applied to a commercial site plan. Those would not have applied to this residential subdivision application
Because it's 5 or lower.
because it's residential
Yes.
instead of site plan. So
Residential are all exempt from site plans.
right.
Yes.
So there is a level of site plan, not the site plan we're going to be discussing tonight, but there is a level of site plan that is done when they actually come in for a building permit. So, we look at setbacks and drainage on a very low level type of stuff. So that's completely different. But what you're talking about would apply to like a commercial site plan process.
Commercial, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Well, I have a question now. When you're talking residential, you talking apartment complexes are not included in that?
Apartment complexes are considered a commercial site plan.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll get to this when we have the presentation on the next item, but single-family dwellings, duplexes, accessory dwelling units, and triplexes are all exempt from site plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the commission? Any questions from the audience? We have one audience member. I don't know. Do you have any questions about this item? No. Would the applicants like to come up and discuss any of the? Please state your name and.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Bernie Brady. I did start Brady Builders LLC. This is John Carochi that's with me. My family's been in Canyon City since 1946. I've been only alive since 65, but I've been a member of Canyon City since then. John's been here a little bit longer than that. We would like to build in the city. We are here to promote the city and to help the tax base with the city. And so that's why I think I'd like to go forward and try to keep a good, positive relationship with the city on that kind of stuff. John has done the research for me on this since he's been retired, so I'd like for him to speak on a couple issues that have arisen on the planning stuff that we just got from Mr. Patrick. So here's John Carochi.
John Carochi, 1317 Field Avenue, Canyon City, Colorado. It's kind of funny being here, not asking for a permit to a liquor license for Sons of Italy, but I'll try to do what I can. We have a couple items that we were to address, and one of them had to do with plat recordation, and I don't know if Patrick and Adam are satisfied that we can deal with that at the, I think you mentioned we can deal with that at the actual level of a building permit application. And if we're okay with that, we'll skip past that. Are you okay with that? I have talked to Manny Colon, president of the ditch company, and we don't have any issues with right-of-ways. We just have to work with them on the right pipe size to take care of what Patrick showed as a slide, getting into the property. So we will take care of that with Manny. The second thing has to do with building on Lot 1, which is the particular lot that fronts on Del Rey. And apparently the fire hydrants are so far apart that when we submitted this application, the fire department did indicate that it's a long ways from a fire hydrant in either direction. And to my knowledge, it has been that way forever. And we are adding one lot in that particular street. And so I did visit with the fire chief about this, and I visited with Patrick and Adam on a separate meeting. And it appears that, and I don't know if Adam wants to address this, but it appears to me that this application to build a unit on Del Rey triggered something that had the fire department look at an area that's been there for many, many, many years with a lot of homes, and all of a sudden, we're going to put one home in, and so they're saying the developer has to spend $10,000 or whatever it amounts to put a fire hydrant in half a block away. And then the fire department indicated that, there could be that the city needs to have a program to help do some of this. And in talking with Adam and with Patrick, I kind of get the finger pointed the other way because they do the impact fees for the Fire Protection District. They do collect fees from the mill levy, from taxes. So I'm not real sure who the decision-making body is on this, other than all of a sudden it's like, well, we're not sure who should pay for it, so we think the developer should pay for it. And I guess we're really against that. It's one of these, by the way, you have to put a fire hydrant in. And I'm kind of disappointed, and I don't know if there's any comments. If we did have that discussion, and Adam, did you want to address that at all?
Yeah, I don't mind doing that. So, John's correct in everything he said. This doesn't happen often, but it has happened often enough. It probably needs to be addressed. We've talked about it probably ever since the 90s, which was the first project that I was involved with that had this issue. It doesn't seem to be an issue with larger commercial projects because obviously they need to protect the fire protection coverage a lot of times for what they're doing, and sometimes even need some on-site fire hydrants and so forth. But for a residential project, it's a large financial impact. And he's absolutely right. The fire district applies their fire code to a certain area, and they look at a project like this, and it's my opinion that they've been inconsistent on how they apply this throughout the years. Recently, they've been looking at residential projects, even one lot type projects. They had an ADU that was in the similar same neighborhood that they saw that there was a lack of fire hydrants in a particular area. And they put on the routing slip that they'd like to see the applicant for a building permit put in a fire hydrant. At around $10,000 a pop, that's pretty big expense on a single-family resident. So the discussions we had with John, he is kind of stuck in the middle of an issue that we have with the fire district. Historically, the fire district has wanted us to be their policeman for their code. We don't apply the fire code. We are a water supplier. As has been discussed before, the water system itself needs no fire hydrants whatsoever to operate the water system. The fire hydrants are there strictly for fire. And our water system has installed those fire hydrants. When we put in a new water line, we do install fire hydrants per the fire code. But it is the fire department's, it's my take on it, and it's been city council's take in the past, that it's the fire department's job to protect people from fire. Even though we supply fire hydrants on our system. We maintain the fire hydrants. From time to time, developers install them, depending on the needs of the development. But the fire district doesn't provide any funding for maintenance, doesn't install any fire hydrants, yet they're the ones that collect the impact fees, and they're the ones that collect the mill levy for that mission. The city's not the city doesn't get paid by their ratepayers or their taxpayers for fire protection, the fire district does. And so there is a disconnect there on who should do that. Not the current fire chief, but the fire chief prior to him had the opinion that it was easier for the city to enforce their code for them because we could do it through city court, we could do it through administrative fines, we could do it through administrative processes like this, and their process is district court. And that's not as simple of a process for them. So it was easier for them to have us be the bad guy and apply this. So over the years, in my time here, we have enforced this and we haven't enforced this based on who's sitting where you're at this time. So this is a recommendation by the fire district. And, council can advise otherwise, but it's my opinion that you can approve this with or without that condition. City council can do the same thing, and then have that discussion with the fire district. And I thought one of the most recent applications, the ADU that I'm referring to, I thought the fire district gave them a waiver for that, but I'm not sure of that. So it is an issue, like I said, doesn't happen very often, but it's a big enough one, and it keeps coming up, that there probably should be a discussion between city council and the fire district on how we're going to apply the fire code in our approval process.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
Question for Adam.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Who reviews the plans for any fire protection that's done? Fire hydrants? I don't think there's a whole lot of fire sprinklers going into buildings around here, but if that happens, who is the one that is approving those plans? Does that go through your office, or does it go through the fire?
No, it goes through the fire district. They have their own inspector and their own plan review that they do.
Okay.
Yep.
Commissioner Clark.
I have a question for you, Adam. Who normally puts in fire hydrants?
Well, again, it depends on what the situation is. If we're going to install a new water main somewhere, and we know there's gaps, we'll go ahead and install the fire hydrants. If someone's building a new subdivision.
You mean the city?
We, the city,
Okay.
the water department, not the general fund, the water fund.
Okay.
If a developer's putting a new subdivision in and he's installing water main, then he installs the fire hydrants. So if anyone installs a water line, we will make sure that water line installation includes fire hydrants at the proper spacing.
And in this particular case, there is no water line
They're not
other
doing
than
any water
resident-
line work at all, none at
Right.
all.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
this is just plugging in a fire hydrant where there's a gap in the neighborhood that exists today, whether they build or not.
Okay, thank you.
Is this something that if this lot was sold, that could come back to the owners that would have to?
That's the point I'm making. So let's say I'm saying what has recently happened is even if they don't do this subdivision, if John comes in with a building permit for that lot, the fire department's going to say the same thing.
That's unless this is approved without having to go forward with a fire hydrant.
Right, so what they've been doing recently is even without a subdivision process, they've been asking for the infill, even for a single permit.
Well, what Mr. Delvecchio told me was that if, exactly what you just said, if there was no minor subdivision and it comes through, he said that would have triggered them to look at their overall map and do some measuring. And I understand all that, and I understand if they want fire hydrants in different areas, that's fine. Our objection is that, we want to build in the city and we want to develop, whether it's a small lot or an individual lot, but pretty soon you're passing a lot of costs on to a consumer, because obviously if a developer doesn't make money, they're not going to be developing, and so that affects growth. It's just it's a big circle, and since there is no policy, and it appears to me there's a disconnect somewhat between the city water folks and the fire protection district, it just appears that the easy answer is to say let a developer build it, let them put it in, let them spend $10,000.
Commissioner Clark? Oh, sorry. Commissioner Ledoux.
What is the criteria and how far outside of that is this site?
I believe it's a 500-foot hose distance, and I don't know. I don't remember the distances. Yeah, sorry.
I know where the water taps are, because I went through and looked at it after we got this money. So the one that's on Del Rey here, that is all the way up here, okay? And then this here kind of skips a block, and it's all the way down here on the second block. So you're going through 2 blocks here without a fire hydrant. And then the other one from where the lot is right now is all the way up on here, which is about another 2-block stretch, because there's not another road that intersects on that area. So Cherry's the only intersection road there without a fire hydrant. So,
And it's been that way before we submitted an application to put one more house in that area.
Do we know historically who put those hydrants in that neighborhood? Would that have been a city thing? Would that have been, or were there
was
different
probably East
codes as far
Canyon.
as?
It may be as old as when it was East Canyon, separate
That's,
from the city.
I'm guessing that.
Yeah.
So let's say we do it, let's say we approve it without a condition for the fire hydrant. What happens?
Then the fire
Becomes a
district has
fight.
the option of using their own processes to get a fire hydrant installed.
And they'll charge them.
I have no idea. I don't know,
Potentially.
I'm not familiar with their code. I don't know what their
Yeah.
processes are. I don't know what, I don't know what their enforcement mechanisms are. Or whether there's an enforcement mechanism that even applies. I have no idea.
It makes you wonder if they're, if you put the house there, or, something there, if they're just going to say, shoot, now we got to deal with it. But that's a sticky situation,
Well, they're dealing with that today with the house next door.
Right.
I would think.
It's an existing situation.
I would think, yeah.
Whether there's a house there or not. Commissioner Clark, you had something?
I actually have a question for the applicant and Adam, basically at the same time. I don't know whose money I'm going to recommend spending maybe, but would you be amenable to a split with the city?
Well, again, the issue with that is the water money is a separate enterprise fund. They have to answer to the ratepayers. And so that would have to be a decision of city council on whether they are willing to do that. Something that happened recently is we did have a commercial application where the fire department required a fire hydrant to be installed. And we actually worked out a trade with that developer where the developer actually gave the city something. And then the city council agreed to have the water department install that fire hydrant for them. But the city received something in kind for that service. So doing what you're saying would be setting a precedent that's never been done. And it would have to be a decision of city council and some kind of development agreement.
Well, and again, understanding the city council would have to approve that. To me, it would seem like a viable option based on, we're looking for people to build. We're looking
Sure,
at-
the argument might be made that it's double dipping or some sort of, you're shifting money from ratepayers to enforce fire code, which you already pay impact fees and mill levies to. That's their job to fight fires. So should they be collecting higher impact fees, higher mill levies? Should they be rebudgeting? Should they be budgeting for this type of activity?
And to me, I would think that would be something the city council would address.
Well, and to Brian's point, or maybe it was Rick's, if you approve this tonight without that condition, it may force the discussion.
What does that do to this process? If it ends up going, is this going to drag out
No,
months after months?
you're not bound to enforce, again, the requirements of the fire district. Correct me if I'm wrong,
No,
Kevin.
you're correct. Everything you said
So
is
you
right.
can approve
I could
this
totally
today. You
understand
can approve
that.
this today. It goes, so next step is it goes to city council for approval. They can turn around and do the same thing. If the fire district has a fight with them as a developer, they have to prove up that they have that argument and they have that authority to do so.
Councilman Hamrick?
Thank you. So if the commission were to approve this tonight without that condition to install the fire hydrant, the question, and I'd like to amend my kind of opening statement, there was another person present in those other meetings, that was Catherine, although it was telephonically, so excuse me for leaving you out there. But if the planning commission were to approve this without the requirement for a fire hydrant, does that establish any kind of liability Or is that going, do we have any idea what might happen to insurance rates, say, for instance, in that area? I mean, the houses are all insured based on the absence of that fire hydrant now. So there's nothing that would attach liability to the city as a whole for.
No, not for that. Now, the insurance rates could go up or down with the existence of that fire hydrant, but I would have no idea whether or not that would actually happen or the difference. But yeah, there would no liability would be attached to the city. And just to kind of stress what Adam said, the city has fully delegated its fire authority to the fire district. They are completely separate legal entity. They have their own enforcement powers, and they can pursue that as they see fit, or, you know, help the developer out with paying for that fire hydrant. They are perfectly capable of doing that, so. They have all that authority to do those things.
So we could approve this subdivision, and this is only affecting Lot 1 at this time? It's not affecting the other lots? So
That's correct. And also in the spirit of what John mentioned in the opening is that in our discussion later that we're going to have, our intent was to remove exactions for this level of application. This would be enforcing an exaction on the behalf of the fire district. So it kind of goes against what we're trying to do.
I wondered that as well. It seemed like it was counterintuitive. If I can make a comment, it seems to me that the issue is not the fact that you want to develop this property. The issue is there's some procedural or policy issue between the fire district and Canyon City that needs to be worked out, and I don't necessarily think you guys should be held responsible for that. If this is something that, if this has been existing for some time, then it's an issue that has to be, and obviously it has, then it's an issue that has to be taken care of, and it shouldn't necessarily fall on you, I don't think. So that's kind of where I stand on this thing, but.
Yeah. Patrick, if everyone was in agreement and we approved this without the condition for Lot 1 and the fire hydrant, would City Council be aware of the condition and that we?
An amended staff report would go to council that discussed planning commission action. That happens with all of the staff reports that go from here to council.
And if we were all in agreement that maybe somewhere between the fire department and the developer, if there was some sort of split, if that was feasible, can we amend that condition that way?
Well, the way
To
the
be
condition is
discussed.
currently written now is that the applicant must comply with the request of the fire district or provide us evidence that another arrangement has been made that satisfies
Okay.
that.
Got it, okay.
But Adam said it, it contradicts with the exaction, correct?
Correct. So you don't have to use that condition at all that Patrick just stated.
Right.
And then it'd be up to City Council if they want to come up with a different arrangement.
I'm sure that we're going to have the exact same discussion with them.
Okay.
Well, I guess if I could make another comment, I'll go back to what I said earlier, and that is there's a disconnect between the Fire Protection District and the city in terms of policy, and you're exactly right, there is no policy. And it's just the knee-jerk reaction to whether it's the city or whether it's the Fire Protection District or whoever it is. It's just, let's put it back on the developer, and I just think that's unfair, and to allow one lot in a neighborhood that's been there for years and years and years without any addressing the fact that there is no fire hydrant there. All of a sudden, it's a developer who's going to make money there, and so let's have them spend $10,000 and put in a new fire hydrant. I just don't agree with that, and I mean, I know we have to live with the ruling of your recommendation and also the city council, but I just want to put that on the record, that I just don't think that's the right way to approach it. If you had a policy that said, this is how it works, I mean, the fire department has their little map, and they show, I went over it with them, and they said, well, there's one way up here, and there's one down on Clayton, I believe it is, and I understand that. But my whole point is, it's been that way for a long time, and nobody's ever addressed it until the developer wants to put in one house, and they have to pay $10,000 to do that. I'm just against that. We are against it.
Okay, thanks,
Can I
John.
comment on that?
One last comment from Commissioner Clark.
I think as a developer, you probably clearly understand that things come up that are unexpected. And understanding your statement, I agree with you that, yeah, it needs to be addressed, but at the same token, that not everything that occurs with either the Planning Commission or, and I'll speak for the City Council, is always resolved before it ever comes up. things do occur, and I see me as an individual on this commission, I see that as being the case here. And I agree with you, it's technically unfair to dump it on you if that's the case as being stated, but I'm not sure that's the case. It does need to be addressed. We all like to be safe. Everybody's house likes to be put out if it's on fire. So as a developer, I would think you would be concerned about that if you're building houses on that property.
I am concerned, and I would think that the Fire Protection District would be concerned about 40 other houses that have been on that street for a long time.
Well, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
And so that's my point is, you know, something else could have triggered this that wouldn't have been back on a developer. That's all. And I've talked to Adam and Patrick and the fire chief and a couple other folks over there, and they said, well, we've been going back and forth on this for a long time. And maybe it's time somebody does come up with a decision and a policy to figure out how you're going to address this.
Well, I think this will spur that conversation, I hope. Okay.
And so just a point of clarification, Patrick, on what the amended staff report will say is it will recognize the fact that the fire district recommended or asked for the fire hydrant, but and if planning commission so chooses, that planning commission did not choose to impose that requirement.
It will specifically state, if it is your decision to do so, that Planning Commission removed condition number 2 from the list of conditions and is therefore not part of the conditions being forwarded to council.
Correct. Thank you.
I got one question.
Yes,
real
sir.
quick. Are there fire hydrants on Gray Dean on the right side? And
We
is,
have one on the corner of Cherry, and then there's another one that's right here on this location.
so we're legal on that side.
The grading is fully covered.
Is this an all or nothing development? Can you develop the 4 on the right side?
Yeah, we can
without-
do 4, but when you buy a piece of property with the idea that you're going to build 5 homes on it,
Right,
that determines what you're going to offer for that property.
right.
And I did go around and talk to the sanitation district, talk to Adam, talk to Patrick, talk to a lot of different folks, utility folks. The one that I didn't go talk to, of course, it's showing up right now, and that's Fire Protection District. And that's because, looking on the Gray Dean side, in the same area that you have one way up on one end and one on the other end on Clayton, there are 5 fire hydrants on the Gray Dean side. And why it was never triggered by anything else, I don't know what that is.
Right. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from commission, for staff?
Yes.
Commissioner Ledoux?
A quick clarification, the staff report says, from the fire district, construction of Lot 1 will require installation of fire hydrant. What it doesn't say is by the applicant. Does the comment from the fire district actually specify responsibility?
It doesn't specify responsibility. I intuited the interpretation of what was written was they're going to put that obligation onto the builder.
That's clear their intent, based on
So the-
precedence.
The understanding from the fire district is the responsibility is the developer, not city, not themselves.
Definitely not themselves. Yeah.
I could read the fire department's actual wording if you'd like. It's pretty much exactly what Patrick said. Construction on Lot 1 will require the addition of a fire hydrant, preferred location at Delray and Cherry.
But that's entirely void of whom would actually install. So,
And that's not even a part of our property that we're trying to consume here and trying to build on. They're wanting to put it on the corner, which you have the park, which used to be part of the school, right there.
Bernie
And
talking.
then you have a daycare on this corner right here. So you have a daycare here, you have a big park here, and then you have their residence all the way around.
It's too late.
And so this is where they want to put the fire hydrant, which then it makes sense because it access, all the way down Delray to this side to the other fire hydrants down here on Clayton. So the whole area's been inadequate fire protected for a long time. And, luckily, there's not been a fire there for them to have to go fight. But that's what we're trying, the point that we're trying to make is, you know, putting it on us is for one house.
It should, maybe, I mean, there shouldn't be discussion about prorating stuff, you know? I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in later discussion, is that there should be some proportional nexus. So an example of, if the water line had to be installed or upsized, and let's say our master plan calls for a 12-inch, what we do on that is the applicant's required for the minimum size, and then we pay the difference on the upsize. We don't make the applicant pay the full size. So it's the same thing along here. Same with the future improvements agreement. We wouldn't make them repave the entire road for this project. They would only pay for their proportional amount on their frontage.
That's my point, yeah.
So, you know, you could apply the same sort of thing if we were imposing those types of impact fees for this level of development. We'd say, okay, this fire hydrant would protect 50 people, and they're 1 out of 50, they're going to pay that proportional amount of 10 grand.
Okay, and that's going to be a city council discussion.
But again, they collect impact fees for when they come in and apply for a building permit, they pay an impact fee to the fire department.
$300 for every unit you build, I believe it is.
Right, okay. All right, any other questions, concerns for the applicant or for staff?
Can I make one more comment, Jerry?
Yes, sir.
You had a comment about what if we split costs, city, this and that. I would be all for splitting costs if we could figure out how many people were going to benefit from this fire hydrant and ask them to pay a share, I guess, you know, instead of just the developer in the city, or, well, not the city. I could understand the city not wanting to pay for this, so I guess.
Well, and in response to that, I merely brought that up as a suggestion.
Yeah, no,
since
we've
we
looked
don't-
at that too. I
Yeah,
agree.
we don't have any authority over that, and it was just
Yeah.
maybe something to talk about down the road. But you got a good point.
Okay, we good? All right, I'll close this public hearing, and then we'll discuss findings of fact amongst the commission if there's no other questions. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, guys. All right, I'll close this public hearing. Let's discuss whether we want to, hey, John, Bernie?
Yeah, you just stepped out.
Oh, okay. Well, at least stay for the conclusion. We'll be quick. So now I need a motion and a second based on the findings of fact. And does someone want to do that and maybe amend the conditions or leave it as is? I'll let you guys.
Was it condition 2?
Condition 2 is the one pertaining to the fire hydrant.
Okay.
So do I have a motion based on the findings of fact?
I'll make a motion to accept the applicant without condition 2.
Okay. Do you have this?
It's right here.
Okay. I move that the planning commission recommend that the city council for the city of Canyon City approve the Grading Homes minor subdivision subject without condition 2. Is that correct?
There's a little more to it than the findings of fact, correct, Patrick?
We would like the findings of fact entered into the record and also voted on.
So section 6.
I'll make the motion on the findings of fact, if you'd
Wow,
like,
that's a
if you'd
lot.
like to do that.
He has a proposed motion.
Oh, it's already proposed?
That was a draft.
I may not have included a motion on the findings of fact, though.
Is this how it's supposed to be said, though, because of the condition?
You can just change that wording. So I move that the planning commission recommend that the city council, oh, you didn't include the finding of facts in there.
I
Do you
did
want
not make a separate motion on,
the findings?
I would like a separate motion on findings of fact if we could.
Okay, so you need to make a motion that the findings as laid out in the staff report are correct? Yeah. And then make the motion to approve or recommend approval of the application with only the first condition.
So I have to do 2 separate motions?
Two.
Okay. So I move that the planning commission recommend that the city council of the city of Canyon City approve the Grading Homes minor subdivision subject to the two conditions contained in the staff report.
I think you wanted to, did you want to address condition number 2?
And I want to address condition number 2.
Okay.
Is that a separate motion?
No, I would say you could include it in this motion since it's pertaining to the conditions of approval.
I'm really confused. Does somebody else want to take this one?
Can I?
Mark's it.
Commissioner
I'll do
Harmon?
findings of fact if you want.
Sure.
I move the planning commission accept the findings of fact that the requested Gradine Homes minor subdivision was submitted by Brady Builders LLC, the owners of the property at 525 Gradine Avenue, and then the plat as proposed complies with applicable subdivision regulations and is consistent with minimum area yard and coverage requirements for the R2 medium-density residential zoning district. Number 2, that an adequate public hearing as required by the Canyon City Municipal Code has been provided. And number 3, that Planning Commission has conducted a public hearing on the proposed minor subdivision plat, providing adequate opportunity to concerned citizens to speak in favor or against of the proposed subdivision.
Thank you, sir.
We do a separate one all the time. So
Do we need to
I
add a
assume we're gonna-
revision to that?
No, the findings of fact can be voted on separately.
Okay, so I would like a call for a second, please.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Smith. Any further discussion? Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Hartman?
Aye.
Commissioner Brandon Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sharado?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Randy Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Now, I'd call for a motion and a second for the recommendation to City Council.
Yes. Now, if it is your intention to eliminate condition number 2, my advice to you would be that the condition should read, I move the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council for the City of Canyon City approve the Grading Homes minor subdivision subject to the 2 conditions contained in staff's report minus condition number 2.
Can I call for a motion, please?
All right, I'll take it.
Commissioner Harmon.
I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council for the City of Canyon City approve the Gradine Homes minor subdivision subject to the 2 conditions contained in the staff report minus condition number 2.
Second.
And seconded by Commissioner Smith. Any further discussion? Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Hartman?
Aye.
Commissioner Brandon Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Sharado?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Randy Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Brady Builders, for showing up tonight. All right, have a good night.
Just hope it results in a conversation.
Yeah, it's too late now, but I'm guessing this will result in conversation with City Council, because there's a lot of questions. And Adam, you can probably head that up, right? Okay. Item number 4, resolution.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I do have a question, and I think perhaps it, rather than relying on my memory, Catherine, I did review the information that during the exaction discussions that happened over a year ago, and I did go back and review the YouTube video of the March 22nd meeting. It was my understanding, and perhaps I'm wrong, this is a question. My understanding that when, and Patrick and Dina, neither of you were here at that time, but it was my understanding that staff was to bring their recommendations for changes to the code to council, have a discussion with council before the new proposal was made to the planning commission. Is that your memory?
I think that was, yeah, at the March meeting, but we had 2 meetings after that with city council with the changes.
Yeah, that's true, and we did that.
Yeah, I believe there was one in May and one in June. There was
Yeah.
definitely one in June.
And that was the reason why we moved forward with pending legislation and applying these ever since then. And we received clarification numerous times from city council to do so.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay, thank you. Item number 4, Resolution 01, Series 2018, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Canyon City, Colorado, approving the adoption of updated subdivision regulations for the City of Canyon City, affecting all types of subdivision and site plan applications within the incorporated limits of Canyon City. I open this public hearing. The provisions of the City Municipal Code, and in particular Title 17 thereof, subdivision regulations, and the comprehensive plan of City Canyon City are incorporated into the record of the hearing as of set forth verbatim. Can we please have a staff report?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, on your agenda this evening is consideration of Planning Commission Resolution Number 1, which, if adopted by Planning Commission, would amend the city's subdivision and development regulations. It's necessary to begin by giving you a history or a timeline of events that have brought us to this point, and we'll begin in 2008. The Canyon City Planning Commission adopts a major update to the subdivision and development regulations, which consolidates major development regulations to be consistent with the Model Land Use Code, creates a site plan review and approval process for the first time in Canyon City's history, and then standardizes and codifies policies regarding developer obligations based on impact of development. Then in 2010, the subdivision and development regulations are modified to create a process for minor subdivision or minor site plans and site plan waivers to address the fact that smaller scaled site plans were still being evaluated through a more rigorous process intended for full site plans. Between 2009 and 2013, during the national economic downturn, during these years, a perception forms that the city's developer obligations are overly onerous, particularly on small-scale local developer projects. This perception also holds that the variations in the types of site plan applications are unnecessary given the limited scope and impact of these minor projects. We jump forward to March of 2017. Although conversations about modifying the city's subdivision and development regulations had begun the previous fall, it was from a general government meeting that occurred in the spring of 2017 that council directed staff to make specific changes to these regulations. In June of 2017, a final iteration of these revisions to the subdivision and development regulations was presented to the council's general government committee. The changes are found to be acceptable, and staff is directed to present these to Planning Commission for adoption. However, as a result of staff changes and priority projects such as the Arkansas River Corridor Master Plan, these revisions were put off for a year. During this time, however, as a result of the pending ordinance doctrine, the provisions contained in the revised subdivisions and development regulations have been effectively implemented by staff since. And council approved these changes and directed staff that the document be brought forward for formal adoption by Planning Commission. Now, in terms of the changes that are being proposed, first, as it pertains to site plans, note that the language included in parentheses is included for explanation and context. The proposed changes to site plan are required only for new commercial and industrial development, and as Adam said, multifamily residential falls into the category of a commercial type of site plan. Now, that is subject to the following types of exemptions: development of single-family detached dwelling units, accessory dwelling units, duplexes and triplexes, as well as accessory structures on individual lots. These types of structures are evaluated as part of a building permit application, which includes a site plan review component to ensure zoning compliance. 2, developments which were included within the approval of a final PUD development plan, final plan development plan, or other city approval process where new construction and set approvals are addressed at a site-specific site plan level for review issues. The final plan development plan already receives, includes site plan level detail for lots created within a final PUD development plan. So it was seen as a duplication of requirements and is therefore being made site plan exempt. Number 3, routine repairs, maintenance, and remodeling of an existing building or structure. In the past, these were considered to be site plan waivers. Under the modifications proposed, site plan waivers are eliminated as a type of land use application, and such projects will henceforth become site plan exempt. Number 4, additions to an already existing building. These are also considered minor site plans, a type of amendment to an existing site plan, and under the proposed modifications, minor site plan amendments are eliminated as a type of land use application, and henceforth will be site plan exempt. Such applications will now also be evaluated as part of a building permit request. And finally, item 5, partial or a complete change in use of an existing building or property. These were also evaluated as site plan waivers as noted or as stated in item 3. Site plan waivers are being eliminated, and such use changes will now be evaluated based upon building permit request, if applicable. In the event where no building permit is going to be required, the use change would likely go unevaluated by the city. This scenario could result in inadequate parking for a site based upon different parking calculations based upon a different use. Now, in terms of subdivisions, the key changes to the subdivision standards are summarized in paragraphs A and B. Minor subdivisions are clarifying language that a minor subdivision is to be either be A, a tract that is 10 acres or less in area, and B, the resulting subdivision would create 5 or fewer lots. Again, you saw an example of this earlier this evening. Also, minor subdivisions would not be required to pay a stormwater impact fee, a transport impact fee, or make off-site improvements such as curb, gutter, sidewalk, or streets. The term off-site applies to those typical public real improvements and required that are required, which abut the private property in question. This change would only require developments over 10 acres or those creating more than 5 lots to provide transportation infrastructure improvements. Now with that, we did have some concerns that we'd like to brief you of, and with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dina.
All right, thanks, Patrick. So Patrick actually already mentioned one of the concerns. So based on the fact that this body, the Planning Commission, this is the first time that you're hearing this, we wanted to make sure that we're doing a thorough presentation to you from staff's perspective. And so there were 3 concerns that were mentioned in the staff report. The first one has to do with site plan. And Patrick already alluded to that in terms of, say, a project that is an addition or maybe a change in use. Those types of projects might sort of fall through the cracks, meaning that if it's simply a change in use where a building permit's not triggered, there's not really a mechanism now to make sure that there's adequate off-site or on-site parking, I should say, for that use, as example, or that they're doing. The parking is a good example for that one. So that's a concern, that some of those might fall through the cracks. Another concern related to the site plan changes are that in some of the bigger developments that would come in, instead of them first going through a site plan process through planning and zoning, which typically looks first and foremost at sort of that horizontal development and the planning and zoning components of a project, then a developer doesn't have to do that. They're now going directly to a building permit application, and through that building permit application, that means they're having 100% construction documents on a project. And that's now when the site plan, the planning and zoning components, meaning setbacks, parking requirements, things like that, are being looked at for the first time. And so if there's something big that's caught at that point, that's perhaps putting undue additional cost on the developer to then go back and change their plans. Now, hopefully, they come in for a pre-application meetings and we have conversations, but just wanted to make you aware that that's a potential concern. And I know in a lot of the conversations we've been having recently about being business-friendly and proactive, just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. So those were really the concerns from the site plan changes. Then moving on to the subdivision changes, there were two that were mentioned in the staff report. One was, I think, maybe less of a concern, just something to note that if there was somebody coming in and doing the horizontal land development, so let's say like our previous subdivision example, they were coming in and doing the subdivision and then literally selling the lots, and somebody else was doing the vertical development, that now they didn't have to pay some of the transportation infrastructure fees at that stage, and it's potentially deferring that or putting that on the vertical developer. So that's just noted in the staff report about deferring some of those costs to the building permit process stage. And then the third component is really the broader transportation infrastructure pieces. So, and just to clarify, and a correction from the staff report, so number 3 also mentions the storm infrastructure improvements, but as Adam mentioned earlier, those have now been taken care of, and that fee or impact is now still obtained by the city more a la a water tap. And Adam can speak to that a little bit more. So that piece is covered, but in terms of, say, building the curb gutter sidewalks, having that connected sidewalk grid in our community, having those infrastructure components installed would not occur. And so are we simply, kicking the can down the curb that isn't there in that case, as an example? So those are just the concerns that we wanted to bring forward for your thinking.
Now, with that, we do have a recommendation to propose regarding Resolutions 1 of Series of 2018. Following a public hearing, staff recommends the Planning Commission cite the findings of fact as a certification of Canyon City's jurisdiction to act on the resolution to amend the city's subdivision and development regulations. Staff also recommends the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 1, Series of 2018 by title. Now, if through your discussions and deliberations this evening, you have an item that you're concerned about and you would like to potentially discuss possibly changing that, my recommendation is going to be that rather than act on adopting the resolution this evening, that you continue the matter to a date certain in the future. That would give staff a chance, based upon your direction as to what you might like to see changed, to adopt or to draft those changes, have a conversation and go back to council with them and find out what council's position on the matter is, and then return back to Planning Commission. So I put an alternate motion in here if your desire is to continue this to a date certain, and that's to give you enough time for this so that we can, since council's committee sessions fill up rather quickly and far into the future, I suggested October 24th as a date certain. But again, this will all be subject to your deliberations and whether you think anything should be changed. And with that, that would conclude the staff presentation. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Obviously, we have Dina and Adam here as well.
All right, let's start with some questions. Councilman Hammer.
Sure, this is a process question. So if the Planning Commission adopted the regulation tonight, then is that a final regulation? Does it go before, it's a final then, and then City Council has no review at that point, is that correct?
Yeah, so as Patrick was mentioning in his timeline, when council did approve, this whole subdivision regulations that are in there now, they also delegated authority to the Planning Commission to adopt any amendments at that time. So they have fully delegated their authority, so it would not go back to council. Of course, we would let council know what you decided, but it would not go back to them for any approval.
Right, thank you.
I have probably a dumb question because I should know. So have all of these revisions been discussed by City Council already?
Oh, yes,
They have.
multiple times.
Okay. All right, let's continue with any questions from Commission. pertaining to the revisions. Commissioner Ledoux.
Thank you. This has currently been applied for almost a year. Are there have there been any issues in that timeframe?
We have not had any issues come up to date. We have obviously processed a couple of major subdivisions. During that period of time, we had the new Dairy Queen come through. We processed the new Jewett's Liquor Store. We have just recently approved the new Starbucks. Those were all site plans. They were not what you call the minor site plan or the site plan waiver. So far, we have not had anyone come through the office requesting to do some sort of a minor site plan or an amendment to an existing site plan. So that hasn't been an issue. We have not had to address that yet.
Okay. And then the next one would be, it's limited in size. Is there any kind of protection against piecemeal? Developer does, 10 acres here, gets a minor site plan, does the next 10 acres, and so forth, to the point where if done at once, would have certainly not been a minor subdivision.
As there are obviously no exactions, that will include road rights-of-way. So if someone is going to try and do a minor subdivision, not only they're limited to a maximum size of the parcel they can subdivide, they are limited to the maximum number of lots they can create, and they cannot have those lots be accessed by anything other than an existing street. They can't use the process to create a new street. And that's a very limiting factor to what you can actually do. If you are proposing to create a new street, at that point, you automatically fall into the sketch and preliminary plan followed by the final plat process. And Adam,
And subdivision exemptions have a limitation, or I don't know if that's the right term, so it's 5 years before they can subdivide again. So people can't just cut up 2 lots at a time quickly.
So
They would have to wait 5 years to split again.
But Commissioner Ledoux, I think what maybe you're asking is if somebody has 50 acres and they come in initially and carve off 10 and create 5 total lots. So that would be a minor subdivision, and then come in again and do another, not a subdivision exemption, but another minor subdivision. Is that what you're questioning?
Correct. But it
So
sounds
that-
like as
I still think there's a limitation to that.
that
So we can
cannot
confirm, yeah.
occur
Right. If
except
it's-
until the 5-year mark
Correct.
Exactly.
for each 10 acre or less.
Right,
minor subdivision.
without going through major site plan.
So they
Or
can't,
major
game, they
subdivision.
can't game the system and do minor, minor,
Correct.
minor, minor, minor.
Correct.
Unless it's year 0, year 6, year 11.
Right.
But that's,
Right.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess I do. How do you, as a staff, how do you, Adam, feel about this? How is it working for you? I mean,
that's
there's
interesting.
one
So-
notation in here that says,
Yeah.
as determined by the city engineer.
All right, so I
Is
lived
there
through, all the way
objective
through.
ways of answering questions for you that?
Yeah, I mean, I lived all the way through this. So I was part of the team that put this initial subdivision regulation together. And what I've experienced over the years is it's the desire of the community that, well, it's the opinion of the community and city council, multiple city councils, that we took that too far in the beginning. And so we tried to roll it back once already in 2010. And the clear and strong message that we've received since then is we didn't go far enough still yet. And so it was, especially site plan was a new process for us. And so we went full out Cadillac version, so to speak. And what we've heard loud and clear is that it wasn't right for our community, maybe not the right time. And so one of the things that the change in 2010 did for us, it just created more angst, both on the part of staff and applicants. So we tried to roll back and create these minor site plans and site plan waivers and stuff. And really all it did was add another layer of process. And the net result at the end was nothing. So we were still just continuing to frustrate applicants, and staff was putting a lot of time into it. And it really was, in my opinion, pointless. So that's why when this came forward again, I think staff was weary enough at that point in time that we were agreed with the full amount of what city council was asking for. We also knew some other things were coming forward that were going to help. And the example was the stormwater impact fee. That was one of the contentious things constantly, and people didn't really get it and understand that and equate that yet to a water tap. even though it's very similar for a utility. And so recently, City Council enacted new code that addresses that, makes it more equitable, and changes how it's calculated, and also changes the time it's collected. So now it's calculated based on impervious surface, which has a nexus to the runoff, and it's collected at building permit time when we know what this impervious surface is going to be. Otherwise, we were just guessing based on an average calculation that was generated 20 years ago, based on acreage for development. And so that was one of those items that seemed to be, a constant thorn in people's side. And ever since we've changed it, we've had zero issue with it, and we're actually collecting more money doing it that way. So we're trying to, we've had that discussion about proportional nexus and things like that. We're trying to be more fair and equitable in that, how we address that. So we were holding up a lot of smaller applications. Mom and pop want to split their lot to sell off some for retirement or for the kids or something, and they were putting in $10,000 fire hydrants. So
I get the minor subdivision benefits here. Can you give me an example in 2010 that you rolled back? You said you rolled back some requirements.
So what we did at that time is we created.
Think of one project that maybe that there was
Yeah,
an issue?
Yeah, one of the issues that came up on that was, so we were, anybody that came in for a building permit of any kind or a change in use for a property had to go through the site plan process. So they had to hire an engineer, they had to hire a surveyor, they had to draw a site plan drawing, professional detailed drawing. And one of the ones that was a big one was a liquor store that wanted to add a 200 square foot cooler on the back of the store. They were having to go through a whole site plan process, and then was triggering exactions, even though that they were not, their impact was not changing in the neighborhood anything. All they were doing was adding some extra cooler space. And they were having to give up right-of-way, put in sidewalk, pay fees, pay professionals to prepare the documents, and was delaying their project by a significant amount of time.
Did that occur when you said you rolled back some of the?
No, so that was one of the reasons we started
That's the
creating
reason.
site plan minor, site plan waiver, site plan exemption.
Okay.
So something like that it would have fit in the site plan waiver. So still the city, though, is staff level approval, so the city still had the ability to, we would say, okay, we're not going to make you produce this expensive drawing, but we still want our stormwater impact fee.
Okay.
So that was kind of how a site plan waiver worked. It saved them a little time and money, but they were still having exactions applied.
So then you said in 2010 you rolled these, this example is prior to that
Right.
loosening.
Right.
You said then you went to a Cadillac version, which then.
No,
you
the
s-
Cadillac version was before that. So
Oh, the Cadillac version was
went
the
through-
most
right.
restrictive.
Everyone went through full site plan.
Okay, so you rolled it back in 2010, that was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Did that eliminate a lot of issues?
No,
But then
what
you
we
said
found,
that-
what we found is it trimmed some of the fat off there, so to
Okay.
speak, but it didn't solve the problem. People were still angry and frustrated. They were still paying fees or paying exactions that they didn't think were fair. City council agreed. And we were still, again, processing a lot of applications where the net result was, to the community, was zero or very little.
Okay, so we're improving upon this, again.
That's every bit of the intent.
Okay, all right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess one more, just for clarification. I noticed in here that it appears that the definition of floodway changed. Is that correct in this? It went from a foot
So-
to 6 inches? Is that going to cause some major issues with?
We
Anybody?
did make a few house cleaning changes that had to do with other code sections. So that is not something that we made up for this issue.
It's
It's
hasn't
already in the
changed, just
floodplain
corrected
regs, so we
here.
just transferred
All
that
right.
language to here, so it's clear for them there.
Nothing on this side. Councilman Hamrick, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So these three concerns have been shared with city council, is that correct? Excuse me.
No, so as part of staff's work preparing for Planning Commission this evening, and at least myself being newer to the city and coming into this, in the review of the changes and thinking through potential long-term impacts to the city, they were basically my concerns.
So I would say that these concerns via Dina have not been shared with council, but they were absolutely shared and discussed through this process.
Through the process.
Yeah.
And I notice in the proposed regulation that there are places where it says the city will approve, and it says places where it says the city engineer will approve. And there have been some additions of city engineer approval that used to be for the city. Could you tell us a little bit about what the difference is there? What is that, if the city approves, who's doing that?
So-
I know who the city engineer is.
So it might have been ambiguous, before of who was doing that, and so that was just clarifying who was the designee for that.
There still are lots of references to city approval, though?
Yeah, and maybe we just left those, I'm not, unless you have a particular example, I'm sure that was, then we felt were still important to leave more generic, I suppose. Does that sound right, Catherine?
Yeah, we often leave those generic so that designation may shift between staff members. If it doesn't say the city council or planning commission, it's staff, some form of staff, so.
Okay, thank you. And is there a definition of what storm detention is somewhere in our regulations, or do we have to refer to someone somewhere else,
Well,
some other document?
we do refer to urban drainage. We use urban drainage flood control district standards,
Okay.
and they have definitions for that.
They have definitions for that. So when we use it, that's probably the first time we put that in our regulations, requirements for storm detention.
The regulation's always been there, but it hasn't been clearly worded that way in this document.
I see it's pretty specific, and it gives a standard, a numeric
Right.
standard that can be calculated.
Because what we would do is we'd get someone that would read this document, and they would call me and say, all right, it says I have to handle developed flow, what does that mean? And I would say, okay, this is what it means. So rather than having a discussion all those times, now it's in the document.
Okay, and one of the concerns was that a change in use might not trigger a building permit. And I guess Dina or Patrick, that's for you. Could you give us some examples where that might happen or that
Sure.
occasion might occur?
So you have a building that was built maybe 5-10 years ago, and the use that was there had been, let's say hypothetically, a restaurant. The restaurant parking is calculated in a lot of cases by, the occupancy and the number of people that could be seated around tables and whatnot.
Right.
The new use that comes in is not proposing to do any renovations, but let's say that they're creating a meeting hall or something else where it's a different kind of occupancy, but they're not going to be doing any interior renovations to the space for that. So if they don't come in and talk to us in a pre-application context, we aren't going to know that this use has happened until one day a sign gets approved and they move in and start operations. That could lead potentially to a deficit in parking just because of the change of use.
With the exception that typically, the finance department alerts planning and zoning for business license changes. So there is that mechanism sometimes where things like that could get caught.
Thank you.
I guess that's kind of where I was going when I asked you, Adam, about that, because, I mean, there's changes in policy, then there's changes in procedures that have to go along with implementation of policies. And I guess I'm wondering how the staff, you've been using it for a while now, but are there other changes that maybe need to be made to the policy, to this, that we should address? Maybe outside of council, so to speak, but,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to create a fight or anything.
I think it's
like
been working well. Patrick and I have been working together for some time now, and I think we communicate fairly good, fairly well, and I think that that's the key, is that internal communication. As long as we, the dangers would be if departmentally things were fragmented and there was no communication. If people are afraid to say, hey, Patrick, did you see what's going on over here? I drove by it yesterday. That versus not my job.
Yeah, which is where procedure comes in.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Before I close the public hearing, any further discussion or questions of staff? Okay, I now close this public hearing. Doesn't sound like there's any further discussion. So at this time, I now call for a motion and a second on the request based upon the findings of fact. I now call for a motion and a second on the request based upon the findings of fact.
I don't have a sheet in front of me, otherwise I would. Got it? I'll do it. Which one am I reading? All right. Section 6, findings of fact. So I propose findings of facts and proposed motion. Findings of fact adequate. Do I read the whole thing? Just,
Yeah, the 3 bullet points there.
all right. Findings of fact, number 1, adequate public notice as required by the Canyon City Municipal Code has been provided, and number 2, Planning Commission has conducted a public hearing on the proposed rezoning request, providing adequate opportunity to concerned citizens to speak in favor or against the proposed revisions, and Appendix A of Title 16 falls within the Planning Commission's authority to adopt and amend.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Harmon. Any further discussion on the findings of fact? Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Sharado.
Aye.
Commissioner Harmon.
Aye.
Commissioner Maloney.
Aye.
Commissioner Brandon Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Randy Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux.
Aye.
Okay, part 2, we might have discussion here. So I need a motion and a second if we plan to adopt the proposed amendments. The other option is to further discuss this to a later date.
If I can make a comment on that, when I read this initially, I thought, my initial reaction was we need to continue later, because this is a lot to digest for one time. But if you've been using it, and that's why I was trying to hone in on whether you suspected something needed to change, if you've been using it, then I guess I'm okay with it. I just really believe that policy leads to procedure, and, you know, communication, one of you gets hit by a train, then we got a problem. And then things slip through the cracks. But as long as I know that the staff has that in consideration and is working toward that, then I don't have a problem making a motion to accept it. But I'm not everybody, obviously.
If you'd like to make the motion, we can discuss after you make the motion.
I will make the motion then. I move that the City of Canyon City Planning Commission adopt Resolution 1, Series of 2018 by title.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, Commissioner Serrato, let's further discussion.
So said.
I just have a comment. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, anything that we can do to alleviate any extra expense to not only residents, but small business owners I'm all for that, absolutely.
I agree with that entirely. It's just a matter of making sure all the ducks are in a row.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any other discussion? Okay, Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Harmon.
Aye.
Commissioner Sharado.
Aye.
Chairman Maloney.
Aye.
Commissioner Brandon Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Randy Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux.
Aye.
Okay, adopted.
Thank you.
All right. Last item, is there any announcements or anything anyone wants to talk about tonight?
Nothing from staff.
Nothing from staff, nothing from commissioners. How about city council? No? No?
Just fill it, if you get the questionnaire, make sure you fill it out and send it in.
I sent mine, but I drew pictures all over it. I don't know. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.